Thank you so much for joining us. I'm here with John Anthony, Justin Smith. We're tackling some passages in the book of James that are hard. We're continuing to go through James, particularly James 3:1, where we begin that not many of you should become teachers, my fellow believers, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. So I'm a preacher, I'm not a teacher. So.
Well, it's funny though, because this verse, I think for the vast majority of my life, has given me pause. I mean, it really has. That I have always taken teaching really seriously because I think of the, power is not the word I want to use, authority that is oftentimes associated with that. And I think also, we all know with communication is such a funny art, even in what we're doing here tonight. There will be things that we'll say, either off the cuff or sort of as we're kind of working through something that we don't think is particularly important, but somebody watching will hear something and it will move them one way or the other, right? Like they'll hear something in that we didn't intend, or they'll hear something in that we're not getting. And so there's always that deep concern for me, what am I saying versus what people are hearing? Am I right? Am I saying the right thing? Am I, I feel like what we're saying, and I feel like what we've been saying about James is correct. Could we be wrong? And if we're wrong, then what impact, does that have ultimately? So I think taking very, very seriously the role of teaching, whether it's, behind a pulpit, on YouTube, in a classroom setting, modeling and working these things out in our lives as others are seeing what we're doing and hearing what we're saying. It's serious, and I appreciate James really here in chapter 3 kind of pushing pause on this and saying, because he's been teaching in this letter, right? I mean, he's been teaching through these first 2 chapters, and there's this moment of gravity here where James is saying, this is not lost on me. What I've been saying and how I've been saying it and who I've been saying it to, this isn't lost on me. This is teaching. And I'm serious about what I'm saying, and what I'm saying has ramifications, and I'm aware of those ramifications. And I think it's really a powerful and very self-aware, self-reflective moment on the part of James that draws those of us who, for some weird reason, we're drawn to teaching or called to teaching or what have you. This is something that we should be coming back to frequently, to say what we say matters, what we do matters, and people are listening.
Definitely, and I think something that I think about, and it is one that just makes you go, wow, like, yeah, it's a hard word, but I think like the idea that it's gonna come out, like you can't pretend that what's in private isn't gonna be made public at some point. The things that you do, perhaps you have the opportunity to teach students or to preach weekly, but that's an honor and a gift and a privilege. And for one, eventually it's going to be taken away from you, whether by death or whatever. And then on the flip side of that, it then also needs to be like really just taken seriously. And one thing that I really appreciate in today's more modern context understanding of ministry is I have opportunities to do soul care and to be amongst some people. I have a group called the Preacher Camp group that is like a group of us, and we've been in ministry together. And it doesn't mean that some of the people unfortunately have had some stuff that has been really tragic that they've dealt with, but just the idea, I think that it used to be just, preacher, just preach Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, just keep going and just be this Energizer bunny. And this to me is the reminder. I think everybody needs it, but just the importance of soul care and just checking your heart and understanding that you can't just teach about it and not let it affect you. And that can be applied, of course, to everybody, every Christian. But yeah, it's definitely one of those that makes you takes your breath away a little bit and goes, okay, I gotta monitor myself a little bit, because this is hard work that we're doing, and it's stuff that we need to think about. So that might not apply to everybody as much as it applies to us, but it's something that it needs to be taken seriously. And so James continues, we all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they're steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. With the tongue, we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. So he just hammers this home. And as I've thought about James being the brother of Jesus and telling us like the most important things to think about, taming the tongue wouldn't necessarily be toward the top of my list if I'm honest. But what jumps out to you, John, about this passage?
This is a hard one.
Yeah.
I actually enjoy talking. And
you're a lawyer, for those who
yeah.
are watching from home.
And I've heard it say that verbosity doesn't really help in legal issues. However, being a lawyer, hey, you invite me to talk, I'm gonna talk, right?
Yeah.
And that's what a lot of people in my profession are drawn to. But it's so dangerous. And I think about my own life, my own walk, and I think about so many times I'm like, wow, if I would have just been quiet for the last 40 some odd years, I probably would have been better off, maybe marriage proposal, maybe open my mouth for that, maybe for baptism. Other than that, I probably could have just, been quiet. Obviously, I think, Justin, was it you or Brian who said that, reading James reminds you of the teachings of Jesus, and all these scriptures from Jesus' ministry come to my mind, and one of them is, and I hope I'm not misquoting, but basically, out of abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as I'm reading this, I'm like, wow, again, it goes back to what we have talked about before as far as, faith and works. It's like, yes, being quiet and controlling your mouth is good, but no one can control their mouth. The thing about your mouth is might be telling you where your heart is. So maybe you can use that as a diagnostic and also as, because like you said, Brian, whatever is done in the dark is going to come in the light. Mm-hmm. So maybe controlling your tongue is a good short-term antidote for issues that could come from speaking, but maybe the longer-term solution is monitoring your heart and doing that and walking with God and always trying to be filled with and feeding the Holy Spirit, because then, the fresh water will come, from your mouth.
Yeah, definitely. Justin?
I don't know. It's just hard. I'm prone to spicy language, to be honest. And so I think anytime that we're talking about language and what we're saying, and I think you're exactly right. What we're saying is very likely indicative of where our heart is in one way or another, right? Whether we're willing to wrestle with that reality or not, or we're aware of that reality or not, what we say, does that, right? Even when we're joking, right? There's truth in all of that. There's truth in that, that humor, that joking, and so I think that's important. It's again drawing us, I think, into a deeper sense of consistency.
Mm.
I mean, just what James is saying is like you can't have fresh water and salty water coming out of the same spring. You can't have olives and olives from a fig tree or figs from a grapevine, right? These things don't match. Your mouth has to match your discipleship. Mm-hmm. Your discipleship has to match your mouth, however you want to put it. Mm-hmm. And it's hard because I would actually go maybe the opposite direction from you, which is if you would say that sort of taming your tongue wouldn't be at the top of your list. It would definitely be not yours but mine. Yeah. Definitely be like in my top 3 of watch what you're saying. People are listening, and you can do a lot of damage with what you say. Intentionally or unintentionally, doesn't matter. And I think the other thing even to consider here too is when James is writing, he's writing to these communities that, yeah, they're spread out, but they're not huge communities most likely. We oftentimes forget how small churches were in the first century. 10 people, 15 people max, maybe 20 in extreme circumstance. I mean, we're talking about really, really small groups of people. Every church in the New Testament is probably essentially a small group, right? And so what does it look like then to be speaking to one another disrespectfully? What does it look like to be speaking to one another hurtfully? What does it look like to be teaching coercively? What does it look like to be acting without integrity in a very, very small, tight-knit group that depends on all the other members to survive, right, and to exist? In larger groups, someone can say something to you and maybe it doesn't have the same impact, or you can avoid that person, or you can, kind of rework that relationship. But in a small group, and those words can cut really deeply. As my wife and I have talked about recently, hurt people. Mm-hmm. And that comes through in our language, the kinds of things that we say and what we say and to whom we say it. So, yeah, I mean, this whole section is just convicting. Like I'm gonna be in a bad space on the drive home. I'm gonna be like rethinking. I'm that kind of person anyway, where I'll replay things that I've said in my mind, for weeks, and just like game film, and just dissect it. Oh, I shouldn't have said that, or I could have presented it this way, and that kind of thing. So, yeah, this is always convicting. Whenever we get into these kinds of conversations, they're always hard for me.
Yeah, and I think it's hard for all of us as we think about this. One thing that I think just today in our time is just digital communication. I think we devalue words. We think I can just text somebody something, it just doesn't matter. It's not a big deal, and it's just we're so flippant at times in our responses to things, and I think we believe that our words kind of don't matter a lot. I can say what I want; it just doesn't matter. I could do this, and it doesn't really matter. And I know for me that if I'm going through a season where my language is a little salty, which can at times happen, I think it affects everything. Like there's certain words that if you start to use all the time, it just causes at least me just to be cynical about the way I view the world. Like it doesn't just if I'm using these words to cut down certain people or a given situation or whatever, it's just easy for me. You reap what you sow from the book of Galatians. It if you are, and it's not just like curse words, but if you're like, using distrustful language or you're gossiping behind somebody's back, like, then you then are thinking, oh, they're probably saying the same about me. You know, you wouldn't even necessarily bring that to the surface, but, and there's just so much when you think about your words. One time I was talking with a mentor about a problem we were experiencing at the church, and one of his first questions was, well, how often do you talk to your wife about this? And I was like, well, I mean, every other day or so. And he'd come home and he'd talk about it. And he's like, you need to think about how selfish that is, basically. That there's certain times that you need to share something with a spouse or whatever, but he's like, he just said, perhaps maybe like once a week you can talk about this specific problem, but just because, and there's times now when I know, like, if I open my mouth about this, it's going to lead us to like a 2-hour conversation that doesn't really solve anything. Mm. And it's just this going down the drain of whatever. And I just think about how that just so directs your life, because you can just, and there's times when you need to complain and lament to God. There's times when you need to complain and lament to your spouse for a minute. But it just ends up making you sit in this muck. And so my mentor was basically just said, like, you know that's going to happen, that you can direct certain conversations or whatever. And just ask yourself, do you really want to go down that road? Is this how you want to spend your 3 hours tonight with your wife? And is it selfish of you to continue to be like kind of dragging her and yourself like down this road? And just, I think we often believe that it just doesn't really matter. I'll just say whatever it is, but it really does direct your heart and your life. So just be careful. Like, just watch out. I mean, the old lie, sticks and stones break my bones, but words never hurt me. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world, because it's words of blessing over you. It's words of blessing over me that have changed my direction. It's somebody telling me, like, hey, you're good at this preaching thing, that made me go, oh, cool, that's great, and directed me in a certain way. And you have that same ability to walk up beside somebody and say a word of encouragement, or and to act like it doesn't matter, I think, is extremely dangerous. And we need to just recognize how much power. Whenever I talk about this, I say that right now I could get fired for something I said for the next 30 seconds. And some of you are like, wow, what's he thinking about? And really, I'm not. I don't have really like anger in my heart, but you know what some of those words are. Like, there's things that I could say if on film, or on a Sunday morning, that if I was to say, like, and it's like, that's 30 seconds, right? And then we just act like, basically James is saying, you have this lit fuse all the time that you're just walking around with. Don't act like you got that down. And I love how he like really levels the playing field, because he's talking about favoritism, and sometimes we can justify yourself with a little bit of deeds and feel all right, but like it's a constant process. And he's saying, he basically levels the playing field completely. Like, all right, if you've done some decent stuff with your life, and you know you're kind of on a decent trajectory with your life, let's talk about your tongue for a minute. And if you aren't honest, then perhaps you could pretend that that's not a problem. And that's something everybody needs to continue to work on. And I just love how he really like levels the playing field there and says, like, let me just slam it home for everybody. Like, how could you work on what you're saying? It's not even to the point of what you're doing, but how could you work on like what you're saying? Because I just think there's an element to all of us. We have these, ability to like really just self-vindicate and tell our own stories, and all these things, and just live in these spaces that are just echo chambers. And we need to be really careful with the words that we say for your own heart, not just for the person that you're damaging, although that's enough, that's bad enough, but for your own heart. Like, where are your words directing you? And that's a lot to think about.
No, it's everything to think about.
Yeah.
I mean, like, we talk about the Word of God. We talk about Jesus as being the Word incarnate. I mean, like the Word. You know, it's funny we say sticks and stones can break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's like I've had a broken bone. I don't feel it today.
Yeah.
I've had someone tell me something 30 years ago.
Yeah.
You know, that if I think about it, it'll still hurt me maybe more. You know, and the blessings that, you know, we can say over people, you know, or not. You know, it's interesting in sort of like in LA today, 2021. You could pass by somebody on the street and say good morning, and they might call the authorities on you, right? Or they might just look at you like you're crazy, or they might light up like they were afraid too. They, you know, but you just brighten their whole day. Maybe no one else will say good morning to them today. But you have to put yourself out there, you know what I mean? It just, there's a spiritual sort of like reflex for any of the responses you might get, you know, if they say good morning back, if they say nothing, if they kind of sneer at you. And just as I think about that, I'm like, wow, the words, we have so much power from what we say. So much more than maybe anything, you know? It's just a sobering word, you know, it's just a very sobering word.
It is. There's a book that I'll read with couples who are either going through like premarital counseling with me, or if somebody comes to me, they want to talk to me a little bit about their marriage. It was recommended by some friends of mine that are in the marriage therapist, and it's this guy who is up in Seattle. He calls himself Dr. Love, and he's in the Seattle area, and he has what he calls his love lab, where he will have couples come in and just basically interact while he watches them. And he says that after years and years of doing this, he can predict with unbelievable results within 15 minutes of watching them talk to each other, like if they're going to get a divorce or not. And his accuracy is like 95%. Just by the way they talk and speak to each other in a 15-minute conversation. And that's obviously important in a marriage, but just across the board, relationally, the way that we're sharing words, it makes a big difference.
But it's so crazy because sometimes you can talk to the person closest to you in the least polite way.
That's the problem, for sure. I think there's ways to have like control of your tongue in perhaps, you know, the majority of like social situations. You kind of know what to say to control it in certain things, but I agree with you. It's the people that we love the most who we let our guard down a little bit when we say these things that, you know, perhaps we shouldn't. And yeah, James is telling us just be careful.
But maybe even worse, even ourselves. I mean, like sometimes we could talk to ourselves in a way we wouldn't talk to our worst enemy.
Yeah.
You know, we could like, you know, we could be speaking blessings over ourselves, or, you know, curses over ourselves.
Well, and you talked about that thing that somebody may have said to you 30 years ago that's still really painful. Like there are things that we're perhaps replaying in our heads that we just don't need to.
We don't need to.
We don't need to like let that continue to. And yeah, I agree. It's that what's playing in your head.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot here. I just had the idea that I think we think the control and the direction of our life just comes from some other place, but we've talked, John, before about that we have an affinity for rap music, and talk about some of the changes in the music that you listen to.
Oh yeah, so I was telling you this before. Yeah, so I was really convicted that I needed to change the music that I listened to, and I started listening to Christian rap music, which prior to my change would have been oxymoronic. All right. But there's some really good stuff. I actually heard there's a song I listened to. It's called "Say Less," and I remember there was a Wednesday night class that you guys did, and you said that, and it stuck with me.
Yeah.
I've actually used it in my practice. I'm like, say less.
That's what my barber told me.
Yeah.
When I told him how to cut my hair, he's like, say less. You're bald. I can handle this.
and there's this rap lyric, and it said something to the effect of, when I say more, I pray less. You know, and he rhymed it with say less. It's really good. You can find it on Spotify. Yeah. But it changed what was in my head. You know, in you know, different things that you listen to and different things that you take in, it matters. You know, it changes what it matters. You know, what you think. You know, it's interesting, in a lot of Jesus's ministry, he would be hearing people's thoughts. Someone would think something, and then Jesus would say, hey, I hear you over there thinking this. All right? Yeah. So he wasn't, they were in the same space where he was teaching, right? They were sitting there, they were acting like everybody else, but the words that were going in their mind were more important because they led to other things, you know? And so I think about that often. Or even when Jesus taught how to pray, he said, you know, don't use vain repetitions, right? And so it just comes to mind, I'm like, wow, the things that we say even to God and how we say it matters so much that Jesus talked about it, that Jesus taught lessons based on what were in people's thoughts and what came out of their mouth, you know? So I say, I don't know what I say all that to say, but it's huge. Like, what we say is huge. It both tells us where we are, but it also helps us control where we are, I guess.
Yeah, and it really, it directs your life. I mean, James is just so explicit, and this is the most, I would say, vibrant of his language, in the ways that he's using. Like, he's not just going to give us one example. It's like, I'll hit you with this, and I'll hit you with this, and I'll hit you with this, and I'll hit you with this, because this is something that we can't just pretend isn't there. So he's going to give example after example to say, like, you can't just pretend this doesn't exist. You have to, like, really check your heart, and like, where's your heart on this? And I know for me, being a pastor, like, and I'm sure as a lawyer and teacher, you feel the same way. Like, we're paid somewhat for our words and our arguments, and we think somehow sometimes that by speaking more or getting our side out, and this is just one of those things. I mean, Jesus talks about ridding yourself of any sort of adulterous thought or murderous thought. Like, get all that out of your heart. Like, gossip is one of those, I'd say, just socially acceptable Christian sins. It's like, okay, whatever, it's not that big of a deal, but just, if you think you're going to control people with your words, just by flapping your mouth and going and going and going and going, you're going to get them on your side or whatever. It's a terrible way to live, and you gotta just really think about how it is that you're using your words, because it's going to make a difference, especially as we were saying, to those who, like, we care about the most.
Well, also, I think, you know, we're all supposed to be witnesses. We're supposed to have a testimony, and we're supposed to spread the gospel. Mm-hmm. And I've thought about it even in my own life. I'm like, wow, someone might look at me and say, hey, I can't believe what you're saying now because I've heard what you said at other times. Mm-hmm. And so I think you can really be a detriment to the kingdom by the example that you're setting with what you say. But you can also be an asset. You know, people remember when you took the time to say something positive to them. You just, every time you open your mouth, you're making a choice. You're either speaking life or you're speaking death. Mm-hmm. And I think it goes back to so many things, like there's our sinful nature, which is at battle with the Holy Spirit. You know, it's every day. Yes, we're saved. Yes, we're assured. But every day there's a battle between our sinful nature and the Holy Spirit, and we make choices. And one of those big choices is what we choose to say. And I say that to say, sometimes you want to say some choice stuff to the world, to the universe, to somebody, because yes, our nature, we automatically want to say those choice words, you know, but I feel like we have to be very conscious and very, very plugged into the Spirit in order to make a right choice, in order to make a, you know, it's very easy for me to make a good food choice when I have chicken breast and brown rice cooked and sliced fruit at the house. If I come home from work and I don't have nothing prepared and there's a bunch of Hot Pockets, oh, it's going down. Right? So I think that part of the way that we, to help control our mouth is just to make sure that we're plugged into our, you know, our brothers and sisters, plugged into the Word, plugged into praise and worship, making sure that we're plugged in, because left to our own devices, we're most likely gonna lean on that sinful nature and then open our mouths and then create death where we could have blessing.
And James literally says it brings about a certain kind of hell. And like I said, like that kind of you see with gossip. Like if you're gossiping about somebody or a situation, or you're trying, it creates a certain kind of hell, not just for that person, but for you. Like it creates a hell for you that you don't trust in the goodness of the world. Like, and it matters. It matters the things that we say. And obviously James is going to be very, very practical about also like what you do, all his faith and works, he's bringing it all in, but it's really important to watch our words. Yeah. So speaking of words, we're out of time for words tonight, but thank you to John Anthony and to Justin Smith for being part of this conversation. It's a joy to be with you guys, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to just open up the Bible and think about it out loud with you. And I hope that this has been an encouragement to you. I hope that all of us deeply consider what it looks like to watch our words and to be careful, because it makes a difference and it really does affect the trajectory of your life. If you have any questions or you need anything, you'd like to find out more about our church, you can email me, Brian with a Y at Glendale.church, and I'd love to hear from you. We're going to have a prayer time in just a few minutes, which you're welcome to join also. Have a great evening.